Chairman Carr, in September, you used your position within the federal government to take Jimmy Kimmel off the air in a clear attempt to chill free speech. You told ABC we can do this the easy way or the hard way. The FCC is not a political weapon to be used against the president's critics. And yet, you've also used it to go after 60 Minutes, Saturday Night Live, and Seth Meyers, all because the president did not like their criticism or because they gave airtime to his opponents. I need to echo the concerns of my Democratic colleagues. Chairman Carr, in September, you used your position within the federal government to take Jimmy Kimmel off the air in a clear attempt to chill free speech. You told ABC we can do this the easy way or the hard way. The FCC is not a political weapon to be used against the president's critics. And yet, you've also used it to go after 60 Minutes, Saturday Night Live, and Seth Meyers, all because the president did not like their criticism or because they gave airtime to his opponents. Your Twitter account before 2025 would seem to align with what I'm saying. It is filled to the brim with statements defending freedom of speech, as well as stating that the FCC does not have a roving mandate to police speech in the name of public interest. Sadly, those principles seem to have evaporated into thin air. There are many things that Chair Cruz and I do not agree on, but when he said that your actions have been, quote, dangerous as hell, that I can agree with. So your attempts to coerce private companies to censor speech that you and the president did not want to hear is really a blatant attack on the First Amendment, a foundational principle of American democracy. The Trump administration has been attacking free speech across the government since day one. President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have expelled all legitimate journalists from the Pentagon. President Trump and Secretary McMahon have curtailed academic freedom in research and stifled lawful protest. President Trump and Attorney General Bondi have rolled back protections that allow journalists to protect their sources. President Trump and Senate Republicans defunded the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and NPR. You've become a parrot for President Trump and diminished the independence of the FCC. The FCC has an incredibly important role in reviewing market consolidation in local broadcasting, cable, broadband, telephone, and wireless industries. We know that consolidation in any industry often results in a bad deal for consumers. Higher prices, fewer choices, and reduced incentives for companies to compete. Chairman Carr, you have repeatedly signaled your desire to use merger reviews to force companies to enact policies favored by the Trump administration. This summer, the FCC approved the merger between Paramount Global and Skydance Media. This approval only came after Paramount agreed to pay the president $16 million to settle a frivolous lawsuit, and Paramount agreed to change its news editorial policies. And then just this month, the FCC approved AT&T's purchase of U.S. Cellular's wireless license just one day after AT&T terminated their diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, policy. If the timing of this announcement was not suspicious enough, Chairman Carr, you took to X to boast about AT&T's decision. Commissioner Gomez, you voted against both of these mergers. Can you share why you opposed them?
Thank you for your question, Senator. I have had strong concerns about the strong arming by the FCC of these companies using its power over these merger approvals and transactions in order to delve into what's really private employment matters, completely unrelated to the transactions themselves. Traditionally, when the FCC has concessions as part of a merger review, it does so to address a harm that is caused by that particular transaction. The Paramount transaction had this voluntary concession to appoint an ombudsperson reporting to the president of Paramount to police concerns about bias and content. That is completely unprecedented. And I know what my colleagues would say. There was an ombudsperson in the Comcast merger. That ombudsman's job was to make sure that the corporation did not interfere with news decisions of the news division. That's completely different than saying you're going to become a bias monitor. So I had strong concerns about us using our authority in order to demand these types of concessions from the companies.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Carr, I want to chat with you for a minute about the new form of payola, or showola, as some of our entertainers in Tennessee call it. And what has happened is broadcast stations use events in exchange for airplay. And they particularly like to couple this with threats of reduced airplay if the band or the artist cannot give them these free events. Now, in the opinion of so many of our musicians, that violates the FCC's payola rules. And I know that you have looked at this coerced performance issue and wanted to know if you have any update and if you could speak to that for a moment.
Well, thank you, Senator, for your leadership on this. Historically, there's been a law on the books that prevents radio stations from accepting or seeking unreported payment of money or any other compensation to influence airplay, the time that music is played on the stations. One concern that you brought to my attention early on, including through a letter earlier this year, is that a lot of radio stations are holding music festivals, and the concern that's been raised is that they are effectively pressuring musicians, that could be, ones that are well off or ones that are just getting started, to perform for free under threat that they may suffer airplay on radio stations if they don't do that. I think that's a concern. We issued an enforcement advisory right after being aware of this from you, and we are going to be and are investigating some issues around this.
Thank you very much for that. Ms. Trustee, thank you so much for your time. Yesterday, we talked a little bit about the World Radio Communication Conference. And Ms. Gomez, I know last year you kind of struggled. You had 2 jobs on your plate, and it was hard to prepare for that. But Ms. Trustee, I know that it's going to be essential to prepare for it because it's going to be in China. So give me a minute about what you're going to do in preparation for that conference.
Sure. Thank you so much for the question, Senator. Thank you for your leadership on spectrum policy. The WRC is a really important forum for the United States to promote American values, our economic competitiveness, and our national security. And thanks to the spectrum provisions in the Working Families Tax Cut Act, we now have the ability to develop a unified strategy where we're working and focusing on key U.S. priorities, and we can work with our international allies in advance to preempt those seeking to undermine U.S. interests in Shanghai, China. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, in 2023 at the previous World Radio Communications Conference, we didn't have this kind of legislative support. We didn't have auction authority, which really set us back. And so I think with the restoration of auction authority and a long-term spectrum pipeline, we are positioned to emerge from that conference with wins so that we're the leader in the next generation of communications technologies.
Thank you. Staying on spectrum, Mr. Chairman, coming to you. Looking at mid-band spectrum, about 60% of our mid-band is held by government agencies, and about 5% is licensed commercial users. And of course, with 5G and 6G, we absolutely cannot afford this. So I have advocated for years for a full inventory of government spectrum licenses, and Senator Moran and I have had the Spectrum Inventory Act, and I think it's important for the record for you to speak about the importance of freeing up this spectrum, getting it in the hands of commercial users, and then also talk a little bit about how the FCC and NTIA, which is responsible for the inventory, can work together and move this auction forward, that 800 megahertz that the big, beautiful bill allowed for.
Well, thank you, Senator, for your leadership on this. I agree that we have to have a balanced spectrum policy. And if you step back, though, particularly over the Biden years, we sort of walked into a bit of a cul-de-sac where we're over-leveraged to some extent with respect to unlicensed spectrum, with respect to shared spectrum, and to some extent government spectrum as well, because we have a very small sliver of spectrum that's truly exclusive use, high power, the type of stuff you want to build 5G and 6G on. So that's what we're addressing in the near term, particularly in the C-band, and working very well across the administration. The NTIA administrator, Ariel Roth, is doing a fantastic job. They're going to be identifying some additional bands for us to move on. But I also think, to your point, we have to make sure we have intensity of use of spectrum, not just build out. One of the things we push for is to encourage providers to make sure they're actually loading their spectrum up. And again, I think that's part of why you see AT&T now, quickly putting new spectrum on 23,000 cell sites. And I should say, in terms of the wireless services, I was a bit surprised to see some of the remarks earlier. If you look at the data, the prices for wireless phone services are actually down 2% year over year. In fact, they're down 5% over Biden era highs. It's not where, we want to keep driving down by eliminating inflationary prices, but we're heading in the right direction. We just have to keep at it.
Thank you. Thanks.